There'll be a discussion following that. Also now curious topic.
Hello, everyone. We're going to be having the Q&A right now. So the link for Slido should be in the description, and you can ask any questions you might have on searching for truth or anything that you heard that interested you today. We don't have Professor John Lennox in the Q&A itself, but definitely go ahead and ask any questions, and looking forward to seeing them. And definitely put a thumbs up if there's any question that you particularly want to be answered, and we'll go to those ones first. So I can see that Niv, one of the questions says that what convinces you evidence-wise that the Christian claim is true as opposed to other religions that also claim they have the truth?
Brilliant. That's such a good question. Thank you so much for asking it. And thank you for tuning in and watching us this evening. This isn't something I've done much before in terms of Q&A like this. Normally it's great to have people in the room, but it's so good to have you with us this evening. Speaking personally, I actually was an atheist during my teens. And even before then, before I called myself an atheist, when I was being taken to church by my parents, I didn't actually believe any of it. So when I found myself challenged about my atheism by investigating Jesus, which happened, it's a long story, I don't want to bore you with it, but when that happened, I couldn't just say, great, Christianity must be true. All these other religions were there in the picture as well, and I had to try to figure it out. Well, I see some of the questions on the slide are to do with evidence, so hopefully this will help speak to some of those as well. But there are a few things about Christianity that were unique to me when I was grappling with it for myself. A few things. So first, there was a unique claim to have evidence in history. There are lots of religions which purport to tell us a lot about history and what's going on in history, but at the same time, there aren't any which pin their validity to events that have happened in history. Paul, who was an early and important Christian, wrote in one of his letters that if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, actually bodily, physically, literally rise from the dead, then the whole of Christianity is pointless. It's garbage. And he says you should pity Christians who believe that. That's a huge claim. It's like being given a self-destruct button. And when I was looking in, it was like I was being told, just prove this wrong and everything will fall apart. That's a huge and audacious claim. And what I found was that Christianity has always put itself forward on those terms. Another moment, Paul is talking to a sort of royal local figure. It's quite a big event. And he says these things weren't done in a corner. The things about Jesus, the things about his life, his death, and what happened afterwards when he rose from the dead, these are things you can grapple with in history. So the first thing was a unique claim to be showing evidence in history. Now, for instance, those of us who've studied or perhaps we are followers of Islam, for instance, we'll see how history plays an important part in the narrative of Islam, but at the same time, it doesn't. The validity of Islam doesn't come down to it. It comes down to the nature of the Quran and that kind of revelation, which is a totally different kind of claim and one that you need to engage with. But for me, it was very clear that if I could look at the evidence for Jesus' life and dig into it, then things would be clearer when it came to all the other religious claims as well. Because here's the second thing to see, and we'll see a bit more of this on Wednesday. Jesus claims to offer an unprecedented insight into what God is really like. In other words, to be the truth about God. Not, one more voice among the chorus of great and wise human beings telling us something about the divine, but God himself come in person to show us what he's like. So if, like me, you're looking into religion in general or theism in general, can I encourage you to look at Jesus as a really good sort of first place to begin the investigation? Because if he's right, then actually in many ways that settles a lot of it. Because if it's true that he's the one he says he is, then actually when he makes the claim, which you can read in John's Gospel, that he is the way, the truth and the life, no one comes to the Father except through him, that's actually something that sorts a lot of our questions out about how we understand God and how different traditions, religions do that. It's not to say that other religions don't have lots of noble aspects and say lots of good and important things, but it is to say that if Jesus is who he says he is, then he's made God known in a way nothing and no one else compares to.
Thank you. And just adding on to what you said about the evidence, we will be looking through John's Gospel in Curious, so definitely come along if you want to look at those eyewitness accounts. I can see that another question has a lot of likes as well, so I'll ask you this one as well. You said that our faith must be evidence-based, but Hebrews 11 verse 1 says that faith is being convinced of what we don't see. How do you rationalize this?
Great question. And again, I think that was Professor Lennox who said that. So I'm not going to try and account for him. And he's written lots and lots of books and things. So if you want to get his exact take on that, please go take it up with his books. But let me have a stab. So a couple of things to see here. Firstly, when Hebrews is talking about things we do not see, it isn't actually talking about things that are invisible by definition, although that does get mentioned in that chapter. It's talking about things we don't see yet. That's why the whole of that chapter is like a history lesson from various different important figures in the Bible. And the lesson again and again is that they took God seriously when he promised them things they didn't see at the time. And they were prepared to leave privilege behind. They were prepared to do all sorts of inexplicable things in order to believe in what they couldn't yet see. And so in many ways, that chapter itself is offering us evidence. It's saying, look, on the basis of all this, you should have that same approach to God's promises, taking him at his word. Now, it's important for me to explain that this is a kind of epistemology point, that the truth of the Christian faith doesn't rest on my ability to show you that it's true or your ability to discern that it's true. That's us trying to grapple with its truth claims. If the Christian faith is true, then its validity rests on the fact that Jesus is the truth, the one who underwrites all truth wherever we find it, anywhere we look. The good news is that instead of staying distant from us, Jesus has stepped into our world and in all the things he said and done, given us so much to work with so that we can bring our, if you like, mental apparatus, all of our investigation and curiosity and questions to this evidence and see for ourselves. I don't have my shiny uncovered John with me downstairs, but let me just read one verse that will help, particularly if you ask this question and you're someone who takes the Bible seriously. It's from towards the end of John's Gospel. John just writes of the moment where Jesus, risen from the dead, meets Thomas, who himself was a doubter, and then he gives us a summary of the whole book. Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, John's Gospel. But these are written, as in everything in the John's Gospel, that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. This is a real mercy. The Christian faith and the God behind it does not offer himself and say, believe because I tell you to. He doesn't say, bin your brain when you come to me. And he doesn't say, take it on a blind faith. Because for many of us, that would be unacceptable, and it certainly would have been for me. Instead, he says, I, who don't owe you anything, have stepped all the way down to your world. I come all the way to you. Come and see for yourself. Dig in to what I have done in the life and death and resurrection of Jesus. And I think that's a wonderful invitation to people who have brains, who have mental apparatus they want to use on the big questions of life.
Thank you. Another question we had that ties into the verse read about miracles being recorded for us to be helped in believing. We have a question that says, as a Christian Scientist, I'm guessing this is directed to John Lennox, but what do you think about some of the miracles performed by Jesus Christ? For example, turning water into wine, which is also in John's Gospel.
Yeah, this is a great question. And in some ways, I think it will help when we come to ask an interesting question about thermodynamics that people have asked as well on the slide today. But essentially, if Jesus is the one he claims to be and the one that the Bible says he is, then he isn't just, breaking the laws of nature, like someone speeding on the motorway. He is, and I think John Lennox made this point in the interview, the lawgiver behind nature. He's the one who gives coherence to reality. And so when he does things like walk on water or turn water into wine, these are things that are just not beyond his capabilities if he's the one he says he is. But I want to just push a bit on that and say, if when we look at those miracles, our main question is, how did he achieve that? We've missed the point. The miracles of Jesus are not kind of like cosmic party tricks in which he shows you that he's just so big and you're so small. They're always saying something about what he's like and what he's come to do. Let me just stick with the water onto wine one, because that's so important. What's happening at that wedding where the wine runs out is a really pregnant picture of what life is like. It's like in life, the wine always runs out, the joy always drains out of the things we do, the satisfaction we want, we never really get it. Come back on Friday because we're talking all about it. And the punchline of that miracle is not Jesus is a really handy person to have when you're trying to have a party. The punchline is he brings the joy. He brings the joy to life that you can't find anywhere else. He brings the joy to life that never runs out. So it's not with these miracles a question of how did he do that? The question is, also, why did he do that? What's that showing us? And when you grapple with that, you realize these are not arbitrary infractions of natural law. These are the lawgiver himself come in person to show us what he's really like.
Amazing. The question that you alluded to about thermodynamics is also very popular. So how does the inherent chaos-driven nature of the universe fit into your idea of an ordered universe by a creator?
This is a great question. It's great because I can actually talk about something I understand. Just front up, I'm not a scientist. I studied literature and now theology, and I'm in awe of what the sciences do, but I'm not an expert. But on this issue, I actually have some area of expertise. See, the interesting thing is that Christians have throughout their history believed that God upholds creation and gives it coherence, gives it rationality, gives it everything it needs to exist. And without him, it would not. Things that turn away from God or somehow are separated from him tend towards non-being and nothingness. And in fact, that's what human beings do when we turn away from God ourselves. We turn towards the nothingness of death. And we'll talk a lot about that through this week. So actually, entropy is a really excellent way of describing that process of everything tending to nothing and dissolution apart from the God who upholds it. And what it tells us is that nothing would exist if there weren't a God giving it order. There's an interesting moment in one of Paul's letters to the Colossians where he talks about Jesus as the Son, and he says that in him all things hold together. I'm not surprised at all when we look at entropy, second law of thermodynamics, because all it's doing is showing me that apart from a personal activity of God upholding the universe and making it a coherent creation, it wouldn't be there at all. So the fact that science shows us that is actually casting light on something that theologians, philosophers were talking about for centuries.
That's pretty cool. We have a question based off of what you said in your talk about human nature. And the question is, I understand that science cannot account for human nature easily, but how does Christianity do so?
Great, thank you. I guess what I wanted to say, just to push back a little bit, is not that science can't account for it easily, but that science on its own can't account for it totally. Science will be able to tell us a lot about human beings, but it's certain, do you know what I mean? So it's not like science is trying really hard and one day it will tell us the whole picture. By definition, science can't do that. Okay, fair question. So how then can Christianity do that? And the answer is not because theologians are very smart people or that Christians are somehow really sort of, I don't know, spiritually connected. They're able to tell us all these things. It's because the claim of Christianity is that the person who made human beings and designed human nature and understands it intimately has stepped into our world to help us understand ourselves. And not just understand ourselves, but help us discover peace within ourselves by finding peace in him. The mystery that Christianity talks about, and again, we'll think about this a lot on Friday, is that human nature was not made to exist for its own sake. It's why we crave satisfaction. It's why we are always looking for more than the world as we experience it seems to be able to give us. What Christianity does is it shows us that more in the God who made us for himself and therefore can give us what we're searching for. I hope that makes sense. So the claim here is not that Christians know all the answers. Christians are often tremendously ignorant. I know I am. But that the one the Christians worship, Jesus, is the God who made everything and everyone, and he's in a position to tell us what we couldn't find out about ourselves.
Thank you. I guess that goes back to what you were saying at the beginning about us being able to look at Jesus and Christianity and differentiate it to other religions that way. We have a question about science and Christianity being mutually exclusive. So are the two mutually exclusive? And if not, do you believe that science is just trying to explain what Christianity already does?
Yeah, a great question. Thank you for asking it, because it reveals that for many of us, this is zero sum. Either science knows everything and Christianity is just going over it with fairy tale drawing, or Christianity knows everything and scientists are just getting out their microscopes for a little sort of, I don't know, intellectual picnic. Neither of those are particularly helpful, because the point that Christianity is making about reality is God made us and this amazing world around us. And the fact that we can understand it, the fact that somehow there's this extremely curious compatibility between our reasoning and the world outside us, all of that demands that we do science. So at my old university, there's the Cavendish Laboratory. It's a physics lab. And over the top of it, there's a quote from Psalm 111. Great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who delight in them. Science is a really important thing to do. And that's why that Cambridge physics department has that psalm on it, because the coherence, the rationality that we are using when we do science is something given to us by God and something he loves for us to do. And many of my friends who are scientists and passionate believers tell me that actually the two things complement each other really powerfully. That's what Professor Lennox was saying, wasn't he? So yes, I don't think that science is just telling us stuff Christianity already knows. Like my point about entropy and non-being, I think sometimes science can throw really interesting light from a different direction. And say theologians and philosophers are coming at it from a different direction. And I think that's one of the things that's interesting about knowledge, the way that different avenues of knowing can complement one another.
Thank you. We have a question saying, rationality is a philosophical concept independent from human brains. Why would our brains and bodies, being nothing more than chemical reactions, undermine that?
It wouldn't undermine that if you have something connecting the two. If somehow the rationality I'm using in my chemical brain coheres with and squares with the rationality that is outside me, that is independent of my human brain. So when you say rationality is a philosophical concept independent from human brains, the truth is I'm always using my human brain to talk about it or think about it. I'm always wagering on the accuracy and sufficiency of my intellectual processes whenever I talk about rationality. Now, you could say, okay, it just is that way. It's a massive chance, but that's just how things are. I think the problem with that is that it's kind of a blind faith situation. It's not exactly the sort of rigor and scrutiny I would expect from someone asking that kind of question. But secondly, it's deeply uncurious. Like, why wouldn't you want to know about this mysterious connection between my reasoning processes and the rationality that is everywhere? Why wouldn't you want to answer that question Stephen Hawking was asking about what breathes fire into the equations? Einstein once said the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. And I think that's a really powerful point. If our solution to that is say, yeah, there's rationality out there, I'm just a chemical, nothing's going on, then essentially I just don't see that we've seen how strange it is that the two are somehow connected. And we need to explain that. And calling it just a huge fluke is, I guess, one explanation, but I think it's deeply unsatisfying for reasoning people. And it's not the way that most people normally sort of approach reality, I don't think.
I agree. And I guess this question also ties in. It says, if God is behind all the matter in creation, then what can we say about where God himself has come from? Are we meant to trust he's appeared from nowhere?
This is a great question. Let me have a look. I've actually lost it on the slide. Well, I'll just answer it now. This is a brilliant question because it actually shows that most of us don't know what we're talking about when we talk about God. this question assumes that God is another item in the physical universe, and that Christians are basically saying, this is God, he's the first item in the physical universe, all the other items come from him. That's not it at all. God does not exist in the universe. He doesn't exist as one object among other objects. He is the one who comes from nowhere because he has no beginning and has no end. He is the one who is behind time itself, who's behind all the processes of logic and ordering. He is the one who gives coherence to the universe in which we can talk about different physical items, etc. So basically, when you ask that question, what you're revealing is that whenever we talk about God, we have to do some really tricky work with our minds, not to talk about a God who is just like us, or even a God who's confined to reality the same way we are. That's very difficult because it's natural for us to just think in terms we already understand. But I want to tell you that no Christian and no meaningful theist has ever thought of God as something basically like us, just bigger in the universe somewhere. He has not come from anywhere. He is a necessary being, the one on which everything else depends. Everything is contingent except him. Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, this question here continues on about this idea of truth, and saying that every truth is based on something. I guess in here you have the Bible. Would you consider the Bible the guide truth book in a sense?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think Christianity makes an even more radical claim. The Bible is true, don't get me wrong. I believe that, and I came to believe that as I investigated it, so please do that yourself. But the even more radical claim of Christianity is that God is himself truth. Truth is a person. It's not like a sort of abstract standard existing out there by which everything else gets measured. Truth is the God who gives coherence to everything. That's not me making that up. Jesus himself says, I am the way and the truth and the life. So for Christians, truth is a person. It's not a guidebook. Fundamentally, it's Jesus. Now, of course, to know Jesus, we've been given this book of the Bible, which has so much to show us because it gives us, and God's worked through it to give us an authoritative revelation of Jesus. But I think the Christian answer to that is even more radical than we might have guessed. Yeah.
Thank you. And we have a little bit of a longer question, but it's a great one. So the way you describe faith as a way of knowing, i.e. faith in medicine or physics, is similar to one of having confidence in. However, for such subjects like medicine or physics, there is confidence because of peer-reviewed evidence. How can we claim to ascribe the same peer-reviewable confidence in faith as a way of knowing? If the Bible describes it as faith as being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. So Hebrews 11 that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. It's a great question. And I think what I like about it is that it shows a bit of awareness about how science works. The claims of science are not just sort of you go into the lab by yourself, you say some stuff and out you come with truth. That actually it's a community endeavor. There's peer review at the level of journals. And Michael Polanyi, who's an important philosopher and mathematician, was really good in the 20th century talking about personal knowledge, talking about how even in the sciences, we aren't dealing with some kind of untouchable way of knowing that just descends through the scientific method, but actually we're caught up in the nitty gritty of lots of different people discussing and analyzing and challenging one another. That's true, as you say, for physics, for medicine. Although I think it's fair to say Michael Polanyi would also say that that means that science is not just sort of one neat method that we're just doing on inert reality, but that the act of knowing is always quite a complex one involving us as knowers. And all these different epistemological tools we're using. Okay, so the question is asking, can you have that same kind of peer review process when it comes to faith, given Hebrews 11? And I wonder if the same person's asked the question, because it's strange to have so much Hebrews 11 tonight, but I don't resent it at all. Let me introduce another category that might be helpful, and maybe more helpful than peer review, and it's the category of testimony. Testimony is an indisputably important way to know things. You'd be in huge trouble in your life, in any legal process or any historical investigation, if you didn't have testimony in which one person tells you about something else that they experienced or saw or witnessed. How do you process testimony? Peer review is a very specific term for a very specific process. So I'm not going to say you peer review it, but there's a sense in which testimony is weighed and discerned and interrogated as we read it. And so I think if you're interested in that kind of question, take up the Bible and consider it as a testimony to events that happened around Jesus. Look at the events of Jesus' life in one of his 4 biographies, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or perhaps the other letters in the New Testament, which could tell you a lot, and get to the bottom of them yourself. Ask yourself, what motivated these people to write this when it cost them as much as it did? What must have happened to them for them to say the things they did? That's not peer review, but it is the scrutiny of testimony that we use whenever we do history and whenever we do any kind of legal process in which we call on witnesses. I want to say that they may be analogous processes, testimony and peer review, but I don't want to say that you peer review the Bible. Now, I guess the question about Hebrews 11 is, surely at some level, faith involves a personal commitment to this truth that isn't just peer reviewed and done by other people. Absolutely. Christian faith is something that can definitely be informed by other people's study and opinion and testimony. But at the bottom, you are not just knowing about something, you are knowing a person, Jesus. And to know him is to begin a relationship with him. And so absolutely, that will call for a moment of decision. And like Michael Polanyi was showing us, all knowledge works like that. We're always situated deciding knowers who commit ourselves to the object of our knowledge. Well, of course, if the object of our knowledge in this case is a person, then that will look personal in this case, like a decision to trust him.
Thank you. That was such a great answer. I guess another question about God and God's nature. It's not particularly about truth, but how did we come to define God to be omniscient, omnibenevolent, and omnipotent? Popular question. So I'd love to ask.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think what's interesting about this is that you will find a lot of people who do this. If you talk to monotheists, so you could be talking to Muslims, you could be talking to, I don't know, Platonists, Neoplatonists like Plotinus, the ancient world, or talking to Jews from before Christianity began, you're finding these kinds of insights. Why is that? Well, this is a very long story, but to cut it a little bit short, I suppose it's because people realized that the divine being would have to transcend us in every way, transcend us in goodness, transcend us in power, transcend us in knowledge. That's just got to be definitional to any kind of God who made us. So I guess what we're getting at here is the difference between the God who created everything and everything that is created. Now, I don't want to start talking about all those different traditions because I'm not an expert in them, but certainly from the point of view of Christianity and the Bible, these are things that are affirmed in biblical verses. We read about God being described as almighty. We read about his knowledge having no bounds. We read about his love, which endures forever. So omnibenevolent, omnipotent, omniscient, these are, technical vocab terms. Open up the Bible and you'll find them cast in a different sense, not just sort of technical terms to approach the divine, but actually you find this God described as the one who's reaching out to us. And as we see him do that in Jesus, we see this unlimited knowledge, power, and goodness. One last thing on this. It's important when we talk about God that we don't say that his knowledge is like ours, but a lot more. He's not like the perfect Wikipedia. His knowledge works very differently. With us, we know something because it's out there and it exists and it's there to be known. With God, when he knows something, it then begins to exist. And that's a mind-blowing insight, right? But that's the point. He's not like us. It's the same with power. You and I have power in the universe around us, according to what we can manipulate and do. But God has power in the sense that if he didn't do something, it wouldn't exist at all. There would be nothing there. And love, you and I, our benevolence, our kindness is so often rooted in what's in it for us. What's amazing with the love of God is that it flows from him like a fountain. He's not self-seeking in what he does. He isn't trying to get anything out of us because he doesn't need anything from us. He gives. That's what he's like. And so those words are really important to us when we think about God. He's not like us, but bigger. He is different, altogether different. And yes, bigger.
Thank you. I think that is a great note to end on. So thank you for answering all the questions, and thank you everyone for asking them. You definitely have a chance to ask lots more questions throughout the week. Tomorrow we're talking about searching for dignity, so it'll be great. And we'll have our Professor John Wyatt will be in the interview, will also be in the Q&A, so definitely keep your questions for that. There's a feedback form in the description, so just following on from what Niv was saying about, you really can read the Bible and see more about the person of Jesus. So we have Curious, which is amazing, every Monday at 6 p.m. and we read through John's Gospel. So that's where we were talking about in the beginning was the Word and the Logos. We also have Mondays with Mark, and we also have one-to-one, so you can read through the Bible. So I'd love to encourage you to get involved with any of them, and the link is in the description. But otherwise, thank you everyone for coming, and I hope to see you guys tomorrow as well. So thank you.